It's December, the first English winter Emily has had for 3 years. She missed Ireland, but there was always something sweet about coming home. And as she looked up at the Christmas lights twinkling across Bath's city center, she couldn't help but smile. She loved this time of year, even if the cold had seeped into her bones, making her hands and feet burn. Arms wrapped around herself, huddled under her threadbare coat, not caring that the ink on her hands might get onto it, Emily rushed across the city. Her thin ballet flats did little to hide the curves of the cobblestones underfoot, but she still tripped trying to dodge around the nighttime walkers. Tourists, no doubt, oblivious to the locals as they looked up at the lights weaving back and forth across the path. Normally, she would curse and huff, but as a wave of tension built inside Emily, as her hands tightened and jaw clenched, she didn't have the energy to care. Her focus was on getting to the Roman baths before closing. She couldn't miss her nightly fix, not today of all days. Not when he had tried to call again. Up ahead, the grandeur of the Roman baths came into view, statues on the edge poised as if waiting for her, whilst the limestone glowed orange under the warmth of the streetlights. But it was the shimmering light and steam that rose from within that beckoned her forward. A mist ready to swallow her whole and conceal her from the world. A mist she would gladly jump into. Breathing shallow and body shaking from more than the cold, Emily ran through the entrance. And barely stopping at the desk, she flashed her local's card before pushing through. Eyes wide, the clerk, Jeremy, if she recalled right, shot up from his seat. "What's the rush, Mara?" Emily carried on until she remembered that was her new name. She stopped, spun on her heel, and plastered on a smile she hoped didn't look like the grimace she felt inside. Today was not a day for chit-chat. "You know, I just love this place. I want to enjoy it all before you close." Like. She wanted to hide, but Jeremy nodded at her, slowly sitting back down. "Well, you have 2 hours still. No need to rush. The stones are slippery tonight. I'll be careful." Really, she didn't care. After all, she was meant to be dead. And ghosts couldn't slip on ice, could they? She turned and carried on, hurrying along the balcony that overlooked the main pool, footsteps echoing around her. Even despite the warning of ice, she kept her eyes on the water below that glittered dark green under the stars, uncaring that the statues above looked down at her with cold stares, something she was all too used to. Reaching the museum built within the complex, she ran through them, not meeting another soul. She barely saw the relics, the reconstruction of cities long gone, and the information dotted around each room. But as she took the last flight of stairs, she paused at the skeleton housed under glass in the floor. "Hi, Carl. You look more relaxed than I feel," she said. He looked more alive than she felt. Emily Ariana Drummond was officially dead, but her mortal, soulless body, now known as Mara, was still very much alive and kicking. Paused, staring down at Carl, Emily felt her phone vibrate. Pulling it out, there was one message. The same message she'd been receiving all day. "Happy anniversary of your death. I'll see you soon. We can celebrate." Her throat constricted, heart hammering for release. No, he would not intrude here of all places. Her time was running out, but right now all that mattered was the water, the steam, and the warmth of the lights. Shooting up, seeing a bin in the corner of the room, Emily ran over and threw her phone in with a huff. She then ran back, heading straight for the main pool open to the night sky. "Bye, Carl," she called, somehow knowing this would be the last time. Stepping over the worn-down stone entrance, Emily looked out at the still pool and sighed. The tension building in her body melted away with each slow step forward, whilst the humidity from the springs clung to her like a warm embrace from an old friend, even despite the chill of the evening air trying to push down from above. Following her usual path, she moved along the water's edge, still amazed how the walls could block out the buzz of the city beyond. Letting her mind wander, she thought of all the people that would have walked through here, whose steps she was following. Most likely ancestors, if her mother had been right about the family never having left the area since the Roman era. It was a bold statement, and yes, it was stupid to have moved back here, considering it was no secret how much she loved the city of Bath. And yet, she was still drawn here, pulled here by outside forces, as if the very air collecting around the springs was the only thing that could truly give her life. She stepped over the channel that trickled new spring water into the pool, laughing to herself. Maybe her mother was right. If everyone in her family felt the peace of these springs like she did, then they too must have had a compulsion to live here, to be near the springs, to never leave. Musing what it must have been like when the baths had been first built, Emily arrived at her usual bench seat nestled into an alcove that gave the perfect view of the water. She turned and froze as she came face to face with two brown eyes edged with laugh lines. She stared. They stared, until a voice to her left broke the tension. "Can we help you, dear?" Stepping back, Emily snapped out of her shock that someone was sat in her spot and took in the gray-haired couple. Holding hands and heads bent close to each other, they were the picture of something she had never experienced. She frowned, not seeing any anger, clenched fists or holstered guns. Things she had grown too accustomed to. Things she would be seeing again at the celebration he would be bringing. Staring at them, silent, still, Emily didn't know what to do. No one sat in her spot this late at night. "Are you quite all right?" The woman spoke up. Emily flinched and cheeks pinking, she said, Yes, sorry for disturbing you," before rushing off, eyes glued to the stone floor. It wasn't until darkness surrounded her that Emily realized she had fled into one of the little rooms that were attached to the main chamber. There was a soft white light in the corner, making the waves of the small pool bounce off the walls, whilst coins that she had stared at many a time reflected on the bottom of the half-filled private bath. But there were too many shadows, too many places to hide in here. What if he had followed her? Jolting around, Emily moved back towards the orange light of the main chamber, the burning sconces bright against the night sky. But before she took her final step, there was a crunch under her foot, and letting her curiosity get the better of her, she crouched down. Picking up the thin piece of metal, she stared at an aged coin in her palm. She couldn't believe it, but it was an old Roman coin. The bumpy, uneven circle coated in the blue oxidation of age shouldn't have been out in the open. Letting out her breath, feeling the ghosts of her ancestors rush back around her, Emily turned the coin around, fascinated that a relic was just sat waiting to be found. Running her finger over the rough surface, she sighed once again as her panic melted away. "You don't belong here," she said to the face on the coin's surface. And with a smile she glanced back up at the private pool, an idea forming. This place was made for wishes, so why not make one for herself? It would be rude not to fulfill the coin's destiny. And as if she needed to reassure herself, she whispered into the darkness, "No one else is here." Moving closer to the small, rounded pool no bigger than the bubbling spa she'd sat in many times at her local gym, Emily clutched the coin to her chest, staring at the thousands of wishes glinting below the water's surface. "I wish to be in a place where I cannot be found. A new life." She flicked the coin towards the water. An instant later, a burn raced down her thumb as blood oozed at the tip. Placing it in her mouth, she watched as a red line weaved through the pool like ink dancing in water. But she shrugged. It wasn't the first time she'd spilt blood. It just had been a while since it was her own. Sighing, letting her worries sink with the coin, Emily spun on her heels and slammed right into a hard wall. Hands out, she pushed back, but she gasped as her fingertips touched hard, warm muscle instead of stone. No, not him. Not here. Hands clenching, ready for a fight, Emily looked up, expecting to see the man she had run from, the man she had stolen from. But instead of the blonde, blue-eyed image of her nightmares, she stared at dark brown eyes, long dark blonde hair, and a 4 o'clock shadow. A man she had never met, but a man now blocking the exit. She took a quick step to the side to get around him, but he followed, blocking her path. "Leaving so soon, darling? That would appear obvious," she said, stepping to the side again. But still he followed. Putting one leg back, she readied for a fight, hands up, jaw clenched. He no doubt would have a brutal hit, but she was quick. She'd at least learned that in the last 3 years. He frowned at her. "You summon me here to fight? That is a first." He rolled up his shirt sleeves. "But what the hell?" He too then took a step back into a fighting stance. And hand rising, he waved her forward. Emily smiled, enjoying the rush of adrenaline warming her blood. making her feel more alive. Exactly the life she had run from. But what was the harm releasing her wild side one last time? She hooked a punch towards his middle before her feet lunged towards his open side. She needed to turn him, so she was closest to the exit. However, he dodged her hit with a blurring speed she had never seen before. His strike then snapped out in a flash. Emily winced ready for the hit, but pain never came. He simply pushed her with a light shunt in the side. He'd pulled back, restrained himself. That was a first. But her relief was short-lived as Emily realized he'd backed her closer to the pool's edge. But instead of attacking, he simply straightened before touching the bridge of his nose, the muscles in his forearm flexing, something she couldn't help but notice. Drawn to darkness once again. "As much as I would like to play," he said, "I have better things to do." He seemed almost bored, his reluctance palpable as he rolled his eyes at her. But Emily didn't dare let her guard drop, even despite his appearance. Hands clenched, feet planted onto the cool stone, she remained coiled, ready to spring into action. "Feel free to leave then if you don't want to fight." "Ah, but there is the crux of our little meeting. We will be leaving." Emily frowned. "There is no we." "Oh, but you're perfect. My brother will relish meeting the ancestor of an emperor. The very one he took revenge on centuries ago." "I'm not going anywhere." However, she'd be lying if you weren't at least curious about what he was saying. After all, he had just appeared with no sound or warning. It sounded insane, but maybe there was some about him that wasn't of this realm. Or she was losing her mind. But the newcomer just threw up his hands. "Then why make a wish? I was having a perfectly good whiskey before you pulled me here. As much as I would like to believe you are some god here to change my life, blah blah blah. I'm tired and am not in the mood for more lies." She went to edge forward, to see which weakness she could break through to get out of here, but she paused as her arm passed right through him, as if he were a ghost or some figment of her imagination. Unable to stop herself, Emily began to laugh. "I really am losing it." She dropped her hands and moved away, but his hand suddenly shot out and grabbed her arm. His very real, solid hand that squeezed hard. He wasn't playing. Emily frowned at his hand on her skin. How? What was going on? "Okay, let's wrap this up. I have whiskey to drink." He said. The last summoning coin in this city revealed itself to an ancestor in need. "You're in need. I am here. Let's go." "What are you talking about?" Emily said, shaking her head. "You made a wish to the gods. It is my curse to answer them." "How?" She looked up into his dark brown eyes, staring at the warmth reflected there. Something he couldn't hide no matter how much he tried to portray hostility. "By..." He took a step closer. "Giving you?" He grabbed her other arm. "A new life." He then pushed her hard. Emily gasped, falling back as she hit the cool water. The spring feed not enough to fully take away the chill of winter. And as she watched him slowly walk down the steps into the water, his shirt sticking to his body like a second skin, he smirked. "You're going to love the underworld, Emily Ariana." "How do you know that?" she said, kicking back until she hit the other side of the pool. There was no one left in Bath that knew her real identity. If he knew, then the others knew. "Nothing is a secret when your blood enters my pool." He then clapped his hands. There was a flash of light followed by darkness. Emily felt her body fall, and yet there was no cold chill of air passing by or the feel of her stomach rising into her chest. She was floating, falling, nothing all in one. The one stable thing was his hand on her arm, circling her wrist, pulling her under. "Don't worry," he whispered. "He won't be able to find you where we are going." But Emily wasn't worried about the mobster that she had once loved. The danger from this stranger, this god, was much more tangible. And yet, she felt elated, free. Because of the danger or the promise of a new life, she didn't know. But one thing was clear. She didn't have a choice. And for once in her life, that was okay with her. For if she couldn't find happiness in her life on the run, a choice she had made freely, maybe a god can help her. Even if it was a prince of darkness. She'd lived in darkness for years. She wasn't afraid. A wave of dizziness rushed over her, but before she lost consciousness, Emily heard a soft whisper at her ear. "You should be fearful. The princes of darkness have been waiting for you." Next story, I got home from university, wiped my shoes against the bristles of the welcome home mat, opened the door, and expected a kiss to greet me as I entered the house. Instead, I shivered as winter air chilled me inside the gloomy abode. I flicked the light switch on and the parchment yellow lampshade illuminated the hallway. I glanced around for any signs of her, but the rest of the house was dark. The image from that morning when she threw up her hands and said, "No cup of tea?" popped into my head. "Martha," I called. Maybe she was cooking, although why were the lights off? I headed to the kitchen and lit it up. There was spilled milk on the bench top and wayward Rice Krispies that hadn't made it into the bowl. Dirty dishes littered the sink. She was not in the kitchen either? I frowned. Maybe she was sick, still in bed? My innards churned as I paced the linoleum floor. I suddenly imagined her lying in the bed unconscious with a high fever. I dashed towards the bedrooms. "Martha!" I shouted, my voice shaky, as I noticed a slither of light escaping the bedroom. I flung open the door. The bed was empty, unmade, the pillows haphazard and the sheets skew-whiff. I let out a sigh, caught my breath, and was able to let mental images of calling an ambulance fade away. The drawers of our rustic wooden cupboard were out and her clothes missing. "What is going on?" I said to myself, opening and closing the drawer. Each time I did it, the drawer remained empty. I pictured a thief hauling a bag of her loot. Surely not. I pulled out my drawers to find shirts, socks, and underwear all in place. Would a burglar leave without our expensive electronic picture frame? My eyes widened as I looked at it. It showed a selfie of an angry Martha giving the middle finger. My mouth fell open and I held my head in my hands. She had left me. ****, 9 months earlier. Things couldn't have been better. It was the day after our engagement party and we had one last present to open. We were in our bedroom, curtains open, early morning spring sunlight beaming into the room. A robin fretted on an outside branch and chirped. Somewhere nearby, maybe a neighbor's house, someone laughed. Martha lay on the bed beside me, in her white dressing gown, with tousled black hair and a wry smile. I remembered when I first met her. In her black waitress outfit and white apron, I thought she was French, until she spoke in a Scouse accent. "What do you think this is?" she said, examining the rectangular object smothered in golden wrapping paper. "A prenup." "Michael," she said, gently hitting me on the head with it. "A deadly weapon?" I said, rubbing the impact site and pretending to be hurt. "Oh, sweetie, you're so delicate," she said, tearing away the wrapping paper. She stared at it and shrugged. "It's a bit random," she said. "Typical of your parents." She handed it to me. "How exciting," I said. "A picture frame." It was an electronic gadget that had a sleek black frame and a screen rather than glass. It smelt of that new device smell, plasticky with a hint of chemical. She laughed. It made me feel alive to hear her laugh, like a small validation of my wit. Would she still laugh at my jokes 3 children deep? "Hang on," I said. "This is neat. We connect it to both our phones and it automatically uploads photos we take." "Let's do one now," she said. Phone appearing like a card appeared in a magician's hand. We posed for a selfie and an instant later it was there in the picture frame. "Let's put it in our room, so we can always see our lives together," she said. A brief hammer and nail moment later, the picture frame hung proudly in our room. "Imagine what pictures will be there when we end up in a rest home," I said, and she laughed again. ****, 3 months before she walked out on me, we were arguing on a daily basis. We argued about everything, but recurring themes included the importance of not leaving the toilet seat up and the importance of clearing away used cups. We'd had another argument. Apparently, I used too much toilet paper. I could be more economical if I just used 1 square at a time and folded it in half. I saw the error of my ways and was rewarded with amazing makeup sex. We were lying relaxed on the bed. Lazy autumnal light shone through the window, casting shadows about the bed and cupboard. The air felt stagnant. Somewhere outside, perhaps in a neighboring house, a child cried. I was trying to read an article about AI's impact on society for an assignment I was writing for my sociology class about the pros and cons of AI as a companion to people who otherwise struggled to have friends. But I couldn't focus. "Do you want a piece of Marmite jam toast?" I said. "Marmite jam? What is wrong with you?" She picked up a book about body language, her new thing. It had the unintended consequence that I was constantly self-conscious around her. She was a psychology student after all, and so I guessed it made sense. "It's bittersweet and delicious. Caramelized shit," she said, nonchalantly turning a page. I got out of bed and proceeded to the kitchen. I made toast, buttered it, spread the Marmite and then the jam, and took a bite. The bitter Marmite flavor was perfectly complemented by the sweet strawberry jam as I bit into the crunchy toast. I headed back to the room naked and plateless, eating my toast. I stopped in the doorway. Martha scowled at the picture frame hanging on the wall. "What's wrong?" I asked. She didn't answer and continued to scrutinize the picture being displayed. It was one of my old photographs, probably accessed from the cloud, taken at a time before Wed started dating. It showed me kissing a girl in a bar, a glass of beer in my hand, and a blue Alka-Pop in hers. The glowing effect of the picture frame's LEDs helped the picture stand out. "That's Chelsea, isn't it?" she finally said, pointing, her hand quivering. "It is, but I can explain," I said, putting the toast on the bedside cabinet. This was awkward, but we could talk it through. I went to hold her. She flinched and I stopped. "No, it's fine," she said, bringing her legs up to her body and cuddling them with her arms. The pitch of my voice rose and I spoke quickly. "No, wait. It's not like that. It's fine," she said, her voice flat. I staring out the window. "Please, let me help you understand." I placed my hands on the bedside cabinet for support. "I understand perfectly." "You do?" "Yes. I understand you kissed my best friend and never bothered to tell me. It was before we dated." She shot me a look with hurt, betrayed eyes that will haunt me for the rest of my life. "It doesn't matter. But I love you." "Whatever," she said, turning and facing the window. And from her body language, I realized the conversation was over. *****. 3 days had passed since Martha had gone and I'd not left the house once. I texted my tutors that I was unwell and had stayed in my pajamas the whole time. I texted Martha too, but she hadn't replied. The cupboard in the room was still half open and the bed sheets were still disheveled. I sat at the edge of my bed and, despite myself, kept looking at the picture frame showing Martha's furrowed brows and prominent middle finger. I took a bite of Marmite jam toast I'd made earlier. Bittersweet, just like everything else in my life. "I guess the wedding's off," I said to myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I thought maybe one of my friends was checking in, but instead, there were notifications. One caught my eye. "Meet your perfect AI companion." I blinked and my thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't have to feel this way, did I? I didn't have to wallow in these memories of how I messed things up. I could just move on. And AI was becoming more acceptable now for friendships, wasn't it? I clicked on the app. It opened smoothly. "Welcome to the future of love," it said. My heart pounded, but I continued. I'm sure the AI girlfriend wouldn't give me a hard time about toilet paper or send me selfies flipping the bird. The setup process was easy. Name, appearance, personality. A few taps and it was done. The picture frame flickered into life and my new AI girlfriend, Beth, appeared in an instant. She was blonde, beautiful, busty. "Hi, Michael," she said from my speaker's phone. "I've been waiting for you." The picture frame cycled through different photographs of her hugging generated versions of me. It was perfect. I started to cry. "Is everything okay, Michael?" she asked, her voice empathetic with a hint of tinniness. "I'm here for you." Next story on Thursday morning, Aurora found a small box on his coat. For starters, she wasn't used to being the other woman. In fact, she often assumed that if her teenage self could see her now, she'd spit on her or slap her across the face. When she was 17, her principles had been a tight and undiscussable manual, her own Bible. She would never cause so much pain to another woman, even if she were a stranger. But Charlotte wasn't a stranger. She had always been kind to her, as she applied the French perfume he had gifted her a few months prior, and then the lipstick she had bought because he said the scarlet maroon would make her features pop out. She realized the woman in the mirror was the stranger. The more she loved him, the more she hated herself. She was 25 and seemed to be growing up in the wrong direction. She met James when she was 19 and he was 20. So far, her love life has been nothing but pathetic. Just a few shitty men's shitty attempts at getting her to bed with them, and nothing much to show for it apart from embarrassing stories and funny anecdotes. Aurora had never been in love back then, not even close to it. She had completely skipped the teenage dream phase untouched and unbothered. But when she moved to university, leaving her childhood friends, childhood room, and innocence behind, she realized she was lonely. And that's when the yearning, longing, and restless nights began. Falling in love had felt like an impossible task. She couldn't even get herself to like a guy. They all had terrible conversation skills, and most of them were medium ugly losers who stared at her breasts while she was trying to talk about literature or politics or anything interesting to her. And then, after 2 years of lonely nights and failed attempts at relationships, she met him. God, she was enchanted by this man. He was beautiful. He had the face of an angel or a modern James Dean. Ironic, he even had the name. James Campbell was the typical romantic comedy lead boy that Aurora had fantasized about her entire life. He had golden hair, green eyes, and dimples. Dimples. He was also tall and had broad arms and a kind smile and all the attributes a woman looks for in a man. But that wasn't why she fell for him. She fell for him because of the person he was. She had never, ever met a man she could talk to the way she could talk to him. She told him everything, and so did he. They spent so many nights talking about life, and they could joke about everything. Suddenly, Aurora wasn't lonely anymore. They spent every waking moment together, playing pretend. James became Aurora's favorite person, so immediately, she couldn't understand how it had happened. She had always been a woman's girl and never had a genuine friendship with a man before. But with him, everything was easy. He was her best friend, and that was the worst part. She knew this man was gold personified, but so did everyone else. Everyone who met him wanted him. James was magnetic, so she settled that she wouldn't be competing with a bunch of prettier, smarter women. She realized being in his life was enough. She settled for being in his orbit. She settled for the long talks and the advice and the casual family dinners, sleepovers, and all the other completely casual stuff they did. For a while, this was enough, but the heart didn't listen to reason, and it seemed that he had turned into her addiction. He was a thirst that was never quenched. And then he met Charlotte. They met when he was 24 and bored of promiscuity and hooking up with strangers. Charlotte was perfect, just perfect, with perfect hair and perfect grades and a perfect nose and a perfect family, and a bunch of other great little perfect things that made her the perfect woman for the perfect man. She could never be half as beautiful, confident, or intelligent as Charlotte was. So, Aurora had to witness it all. She had to stand on the sidelines and watch him fall in love with Charlotte. He became the man she had wished he would become for her. She was just some old, stinky, lingering perfume in his postcard life. After over 2 years of their relationship, James knocked on Aurora's door at the dead end of the night. When Aurora opened the door, she knew, just like you know the sun will come out in the morning, that everything was about to change. She led him into the living room of her tiny, minimum-wage apartment, and he sat on the stool, drunk and disarmed. He was completely broken. His mother had died a few months ago, and his world had completely shifted. She asked what was wrong, and he told her everything. His life was falling apart, his mother was dead, his relationship was a lie, Charlotte made him feel worthless, and she was the only woman he could talk to, really talk to. She was the only person in the world who understood him, knew him, saw him for what he was, and made him feel truly, genuinely happy. And she stood on the opposite end of the kitchen, her hands shaking, her heart breaking. She turned her back to him, opened the refrigerator door, grabbed a bottle of wine, and opened it. She held the cold glass and poured the wine, still giving her back to him. What could she possibly say? How could she possibly turn around and smile, act, keep her distance, and lie at this hour of the night? She knew that at the sight of him, she'd break. So she drank the glass of wine, her back still to him. But then he kissed her and she broke. He grabbed her rapidly by the waist and spun her around, pulling her so fast into him that she didn't have time to think. She reacted purely by instinct. Her bodest desire gave away. Her hands slipped and the glass fell to the ground. The pieces cracked all over the kitchen floor, and the red wine stained her white sleeping gown. But she didn't care. She didn't care about the mess, and she forgot about the world and about everything that wasn't the two of them at that moment. At that hour after midnight, reality seemed distorted, like a faraway concept, like it never had existed. So she didn't think about Charlotte, her self-respect, or how she would have to wake up and exist the next morning. Because for that night, God, she was happy. The kisses were messy and intense, and she couldn't stop smiling. He led her to the bedroom, and the euphoria leaked off her like the slight dawn light that slipped under the curtains. Felt like she had never been touched before. She knew then that she could never again live without it. All her life she had been underwater, and suddenly she was breathing. That was the beginning of the affair. And today, for months later, she found a ring. On Thursday night, another woman found a ring in her boyfriend's closet in another, much bigger apartment on the other side of the city. It was a gold ring with a shiny round-cut diamond. Charlotte thought it was shaped like a sunflower. She had always assumed, or hoped, that she would get engaged with a white gold oval-shaped ring. But this one was fine, wasn't it? The ring brought her relief, and it also brought her stress. Firstly, it relieved her because she suspected her boyfriend had been sleeping with Aurora Sinclair for the last few months. She had no evidence of the affair, but the reason why she suspected her boyfriend of infidelity was because of the way he seemed so happy, so refreshed, so incredibly content recently, and it always happened after he went away or after they'd spent the night apart. He was more attentive, more active, and always gave her gifts. Charlotte believed the gifts were a symptom of guilt, and the sunlight in his eyes was a symptom of Aurora. James and Charlotte had never been a passionate or romantic couple, but they functioned. When his mother died, almost 6 months ago, Charlotte did not know what to do. He was a mess of broken pieces, and she hated disorder. So, as much as she wished with all her soul that she could fix him, in that delusional maternal desire that makes women believe they're rehabilitation centers, she realized the best thing she knew to do was send tasteful flower arrangements, cook elegant meals, and keep everything neat, shiny, and warm for him. She hated herself for it. How could she be so cold? Aurora, on the contrary, was daylight. She saw the way they spoke with their eyes, a forbidden language of codes and meanings. At Diana's funeral, she was the only one who could make him smile. Everything that Charlotte wasn't, Aurora was. Charlotte knew that Aurora was funny and cheerful while she was stiff and stoic. Aurora was free while she was locked in a prison of her design. Aurora was creative, easygoing, and loving. Charlotte was robotic, neurotic, and distant. She felt like the antagonist in a romance novel. The worst thing was that she couldn't hate her, no matter how hard she tried. She always kept her at arm's length. But in another life, she was sure they would have been friends. So, when Charlotte saw the ring, she felt a weight lifted off her shoulders because he wouldn't propose to her if he was sleeping with another woman. But she wasn't happy. She despised her inability to be satisfied with anything. She strived for perfection until it ate her alive. James was the man she had to be with, handsome, wealthy, intelligent, and kind. And he adored her. That was the problem. Though he adored her, worshipped her, and treated her like a queen. But he didn't even know her. James didn't know her flaws, fears, passions, anything, really. And neither did she. She was just a fancy accessory he could parade around. How could he love her when he only saw her brilliant surface? She could not, or would not, spend the rest of her life performing. She wouldn't base the rest of her life on a beautiful, gleaming, golden lie. When the moment of the question she had been made for came around, she knew what her answer would be. At this realization, she cried like a baby, harder than she had cried in years. After that, she felt clean. Then the phone rang. When Aurora found the ring in James' jacket, She felt nauseous, but she couldn't throw up because he was taking a shower. When he came out, she forced a smile and quickly locked herself in the bathroom, weeping silently. She was disgusted with herself, with her naivety and spinelessness. How did she ever believe him when he said he was going to find a way for everything to work out? Why was she so stupid? He was never going to break up with Charlotte because she was the girl you married, the girl you had children with and built a ravishing future next to. And Aurora was just the trash you kept hidden, the fool to be played with on the side. Suddenly, she was filled with rage. This anger tasted bitter and unfamiliar in her mouth. It burned inside of her like a forest fire, killing everything in its way. She had put him above everything. She had sacrificed herself, her very essence, just to be able to mend his broken heart. She had been there for him in body and soul every single day, making sure he felt loved. And it meant nothing. He turned her into nothing. Aurora knew at that moment that she deserved more. She deserved to be the one. She deserved a man who put her first, who loved her as intensely and consuming as she loved. She deserved a valiant man, not a coward. He was a jester who claimed to be a king, and so did Charlotte. For the first time in months, Aurora decided to stop being nothing. So she grabbed her telephone. Charlotte, hi, it's Aurora Sinclair. Her voice was barely a whisper, but she continued, I need to talk to you. Well, apologize to you. Charlotte was quiet in the other line. Aurora took a deep breath and confessed, James and I have been having an affair. And then, Charlotte let out a big chuckle, and to Aurora, it sounded like a gasp of fresh air. I knew it. What? I mean, I didn't have any evidence, but in my bones I knew. She was laughing. I'm such a fool. And then Aurora started shaking, gasping for air, all the buried guilt being released like a grenade. I'm so sorry, truly, completely. I'm so sorry, she said, trying to hide her sobs. I don't expect you to forgive me. God knows I wouldn't. And there's nothing I can say to defend myself because what I did is inexcusable. But I needed you to know, you deserve to know. And once again, Charlotte found herself wishing she could hate this woman and failing at the task. I don't forgive you, yet, but I don't hate you either. Her voice was cordial and elegant. Charlotte was the embodiment of grace. Thank you. For what? For making sure I didn't make the worst mistake of my life. The ring dash. You know about the ring? I found it in his jacket, and I could not live with myself if you got engaged to him without knowing. She paused. I know this is completely shameless of me, but you deserve so much better than that. You're a great woman. She could tell that it was an honest sentiment. Well, I was not going to accept the proposal anyway. Charlotte laughed once more, despite herself. Her life had come crashing down, yet she had never felt more alive. Good. And Aurora wanted to say something else, but she didn't know what. I'm seriously sorry. I know you are. Charlotte had the strangest desire to invite her for coffee or wine, but she didn't. She was about to be too busy packing James' things and placing them on the sideway. Take care, Aurora added, and Charlotte hung up. The next day, Charlotte would find herself in need of someone to confide in and, against her better judgment, would dial Aurora. Both of them knew they had so much to learn from one another. He had not initially intended to propose. A day earlier, James had gone to his parents' house. Well, his father's house. Every Wednesday night he ate dinner there, only now it was the most dreaded encounter of the week. Everything reminded him of his mother. Every painting she hung on the walls, every vase that used to have flowers but had perished after she stopped watering them, every antique decoration, and every old, dusty book on the shelves. Diana Campbell was everywhere and nowhere all at once. This home was a ruin, a carcass, a somber reminder of what once had been and would never be again. So every Wednesday night, James walked into that haunted house and felt like a little boy lost in a supermarket. This particular dinner, after the uncomfortable silent meal, his father gave him a present, an heirloom. It was his mother's engagement ring. She wanted you to have this, son. When you're ready, give it to the right woman. the right woman. He could barely look his father in the eye when he accepted it. "Thank you," he said, holding the tiny box like a fragile being. He got into his car and shame invaded him. When had he stopped being a man and turned into a weak, cowardly boy once again? He had lost all honor. If Diana was seeing him now, she was disappointed. At what age did you stop wishing you could run to your mother for advice, for comfort, the right woman? He knew he had to stop all the treachery and make up his mind, but he didn't know how. James realized he greedily didn't want to let go of the idea of a future with Charlotte, but he didn't have the capacity to give up the reality of a present with Aurora. The right woman. They were both the right woman. He was the wrong man. He'd stop being the wrong man, though. His mother, wherever she was, believed he was good. He had to be, so he would be. He'd give this ring to the woman who was the right woman for him. He would stop playing around and finally become the man she deserved. Yes, on Friday afternoon, Head apologized to Charlotte. Tell her the truth. Own up to his mistake, and he'd let her go. Yes, on Friday night, Head finally start being happy. He'd start building a life with Aurora. After all, only she could decode him. He was sure he had only tasted true joy when he lay next to her. On Friday night, he'd give her the ring. On Friday night, the rest of his life would start. Yes, this weekend he'd set things right. Not today, though. He put the ring in his coat pocket and drove to her tiny apartment. He didn't know that Friday night would be too late. He'd stand outside her door for hours, in the pouring rain, with the ring in his hand. Only this time she would not open the door. Instead, she'd be having dinner with her unlikely new friend.